In this lesson, we're going to take a look at some more examples of how to calculate percents mentally. Okay, so let's start with 40% of 120. So we've learned the 10% trick, and the 10% trick is that if you take the number that you're dealing with and you move the decimal one place to the left, that gives you 10% of the number. So in this case, I don't want to know 10%, I want to know 40%. Well, 40% is 4 times 10, okay? So all I have to do then is take my 10% number and multiply it by 4. So in this case, I end up getting 48, and I know my answer then is 48. So I'll look at another example using this 10% trick. So if we start with the number 52, if we move the decimal one place to the left, that gives us 10% of the number. So in this case, 10% of 52 is 5.2. So I don't want to know 10% though, I want to know 30%. Well, 30% is 3 times 10. Okay, this is times 3, right, to get to 30%. So all I need to do then is multiply this number by 3. So when I do that, I get 15.6. Okay, so the 30% of 52 is 15.6. Take a look at another example. Again, we're going to use our 10% trick. So if I move the decimal one place to the left here, 10% of 12 is 1.2. Okay, so using my 10% trick to get to, I want to know 35%. So to get to 30%, I would have to multiply by 3. So let's go ahead and do that. So if I do this by 3, I get 3.6. But I don't need just 30%, I need 35%. So I need to get that additional 5%. Okay, so to get that additional 5%, I need half of 10%. Okay, so 5% is half, 5% is half of 10%. So half of 1.2, or in other words, half of 12 is 6. So half of 1.2 is 0.6. So this is my 30%, this is my 5%. So if I add those two numbers together, I get 4.2. So 35% of 12 is 4.2. So that's one way to do it mentally. All right, let's look at another one similar to that. So if we have 15% of 37, again, we're going to use our 10% trick. Okay, so we're going to move the decimal one place to the left, and we know now that 10% is 3.7. Okay, so now I don't want 10%, I want to know 15%. So I also need to know what 5% is. Well, we just talked about how 5% is half of 10%. Okay, so if we figure that out, half of 3.7 is, let's see, 1.5 would be half of 3, and half of 0.7 is 0.35. So if we add those together, we get 1.85. So if we add our 10% plus our 5%, oops, I'm sorry, that's 8.5, we end up getting 15% of 37, 5.55. All right, let's take a look at another one here, 6%. Now in this case, the 10% trick isn't going to be very helpful because this number is less than 10%. So what we're going to use is a 1% trick, okay? To find 1%, we need to move the decimal 2 places to the left. So 1% of this is 1.2. So if I have 1%, I want to get to 6%, I need to multiply by 6. So I'm going to multiply this by 6, and I get 7.2. So 6% of 120 is 7.2. All right, we'll look at one more example that uses the 1% trick. Again, this is less than 10%. So if I move this 2 places to the left, I know that 1% is the same as 0.16. But I don't want 1%, I want 3%. So to go from 1% to 3%, I need to multiply by 3. So I'm going to multiply this number by 3, and I get 0.48. So 3% of 16 is 0.48. So those are some examples of how to calculate percentages without using a calculator.